we're shooting ourselves in the foot because the leaders of the future are being built through these entry-level jobs. How will those young professionals learn? Where will they learn the tacit knowledge of how things get done if they don't have the opportunity to observe somebody performing it that way? So we have this polarization now of skills where people who have depth and expertise and capabilities will be able to amplify their performance and work on interesting problems and have an earning and a living, whereas some of these entry-level roles may not necessarily be able to have access to some of those jobs. And the companies are going to miss building their talent pipeline.
Welcome to Work Matters, where we explore what leaders can do to make work more productive, valuable, meaningful, and impactful. I am your host, Thomas Bertels.
In today's episode of the Work Matters podcast, we're taking a look at the AI-enabled workforce, and my guest is Stela Lupushor. Stella is a consultant who works with clients on creating great work experiences through technology, human-centered design, people analytics, and future thinking. She's an advisor to startups and venture funds, and a sought-after speaker on the topics of people analytics and the future of work. She is also an adjunct professor at NYU's Human Capital Analytics and Technology Master's Program and the co-author of Humanizing Human Capital and Humans at Work. Earlier in her career, she held leadership roles at Fidelity, TIAA, IBM, and PwC. In our conversation, we explore how AI is reshaping the way companies think about the workforce, how the evolution of AI will change the skill sets for HR, what HR can do to equip line managers with the skills to redesign work for AI, what is holding companies back from going all in on AI, and how will AI force business leaders and HR leaders to rethink the metrics that they apply and utilize in making talent decisions. We end the conversation with a discussion on what the best HR teams will do 5 years from now. I hope you will enjoy this conversation. I'm very excited to welcome Stela Lupushor back to the podcast. Stella, welcome to the show.
Thrilled to be here, Thomas, and great to have the opportunity to be with your listeners again.
Wonderful. So there's been a lot of discussion about how AI will change how work gets done in the future. You're sitting at the forefront. You're a thought leader in terms of people analytics, in terms of HR operating systems. How do you see AI reshaping the way companies think about the workforce?
I would put it in 3 major buckets. You have the content of the work itself changing. What we do, how we do it. Rand published recently a paper on scenario planning and economic impact of AI, and they describe AI's impact on jobs through lenses. One is vertical, the second one is horizontal. Vertical is full displacement, right? You automate an activity or you automate somebody's job and replace it with AI or agents or whatever the technology of choice is. You have horizontal automation, which is really augmenting the human capacity. So you leave the worker more empowered and more productive as a result of their ability to extend their efficiency or have access to more content much faster. So content of what that horizontal versus vertical automation hasn't been really described yet. And I think it's an opportunity to start engaging in those conversations. What does it make sense to do? How ready some of these technologies are to take over completely? How will deploying some of these technologies increase the risk profile of some companies? Because it's still early on. We still don't necessarily know how some of them work. So there is a lot of opportunity for HR to get engaged to rethink what that content of work is and how you start thinking about redesigning the workflows, redesigning roles and activities and tasks within the job descriptions. And then how do you prepare the organization to move towards that future, because it requires new skills, new way of measuring performance, new way of managing this work and allocating it adequately. The second bucket is the context, right? When we think about the environment that we're currently finding ourselves, not only economically, but also politically, geopolitically, right? There are a lot of moving parts. And it feels like every day we are bombarded with a whole new set of realities that we need to navigate. So it is important for organizations to prepare for multiple futures. So this is where some of the scenario planning conversations need to come in. What if we get to AGI by 2027, as some predict? What would the work look like, and how do we need to rethink the business model, the workforce composition and footprint, the customer base? So it's a broader set of visions and futures that we need to explore, have that conversation with the business leaders and explore the risk factors, as well as what are some of the low risk and no brainer steps we should take regardless of what scenario comes up. And then the third bucket, it's more about the concept of what work is. We are at the precipice of another major transformation. So if we think historically, there's always some of these foundational technologies that would come and disrupt status quo and create new industries, new jobs, new opportunities, ways to create value. AI in general is one of those foundational technologies that will create a whole new set of businesses and ways to engage and offerings and products. And we have to really rethink what is work in this new world where a lot of things, especially white collar work that can be expressed through routines or there's sufficient data to train models, will be automated and displaced. How people earn an income, what safety net we need to put in place for those who are not able to transition to that future. What is the workforce definition when you have digital workers working alongside with human workers? What is the workplace itself? You can now perform a lot of things through augmented reality. What does it mean to create value, and who benefits out of it? And I think that's one of the bigger societal questions. As more and more corporations decide to automate a lot of their activities and reduce variability that humans usually introduce, how do we redistribute the value that gets created through this automation? Who benefits out of it? Are we pushing a lot of people into gig economy without safety net and without any access to benefits that the data that we provided is now being used to create value for a smaller group of leaders? So I think there are a lot of big conversations to get into, and we as a society probably need to get involved a lot more across the board, not just HR.
Yeah, no doubt. One story I've been following is the Moderna story. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, Moderna made the decision to merge the HR function with the technology function. And I think that's maybe an outlier at this point in time. But what do you think drives that? Do you think that's a model that like a lot of companies are going to adopt, given that those worlds become increasingly intertwined?
I think this story itself is probably positioned a little more futuristic than maybe the background behind it. So the leader who is now leading both and HR, she was the HR of the former CIO, right? So she had the exposure, the understanding, the knowledge, the business acumen necessary to drive that conversation. So it made sense to combine the two roles since she had the knowledge and the ability to navigate both sides. It may be the first of many to come, because it's really at the end of the day, how do you manage the workforce to perform the work that the company needs to do? And if you have both digital and human workers, it is really about the optimal allocation of activities across the choices you have for the workforce, and making deliberate choices on how that will change performance, what compensation would look like now that you can do three times more work activities. It will change probably the physical footprint of your workforce. It will change also some of the risk profiles that HR usually gets involved. And it is, in a way, a logical direction for some of the roles. I, I don't think we are going to be limited just to agents and workers, human workers. There will be a point in time when we'll also have robots part of the same vocabulary. So it's thinking across the entire teams of portfolio of workforce that you have at your disposal and making sure that the work gets allocated adequately, and then you're not diminishing the human capacity and you still figure out how you tap into the creativity, into the ability to connect to customers and ability to tell stories that the humans bring to the table that can be amplified by a lot of the non-human workers.
So maybe Moderna is an outlier, or maybe it's a sign of things to come. Another story that's going around is Duolingo, who I think
Yes.
famously declared themselves to be an AI first company.
Yeah.
And at least from what I've read, what that means is that leaders now have to justify why they don't use AI to get the work done. What's your perspective on that? Do you think that's a model that a lot of people will follow? Do you think that's an outlier?
I think a lot of the CEOs are going to use that as a way to message the importance. And we've seen Amazon making the same declarations, and probably many others will follow. It is an imperative to have people take their development and curiosity in their hands. Is one of those technologies that is moving fast. You cannot wait for a training to come next year to give you the necessary education. It's one of those technologies with relatively low barrier of access. You can create an account and start playing and start learning about it by using it. And without that experimentation, it's really difficult to figure out how it can be effective and can be helpful to you in the context of your work. Whether it's a message to scare people into it or just convey the point, it is an important point to pay attention to. I think on the other side, if I think about Duolingo, people still want to buy from people. It's all about relational capital that you have to develop and build in order to be able to make those transactions. Even OpenAI and Anthropic and all of those people have salespeople who engage with others to sell their products. It's not like you're completely automating and removing the human from the transactional side. It's really having that mindset all the time that yes, it may be a gimmick, it may be a clickbait for some of these headlines, but at the core, the point is you have to lean into it. You have to learn, you have to experiment, and you have to stay on top of it such that you're not actually the one who's being automated away.
I can imagine just staying on top of it, given how fast the field moves, is the job of Sisyphus. Is you can never stop. The technology is moving so fast. At least that's what it seems right now. Now, with that also comes tremendous risk. You talked about the need to experiment, to try things out, but HR leaders tend to be, in my experience, more on the conservative side. How do you see HR leaders getting their arms around the risk management aspect of this?
As with any technology adoption, it's a jagged line, and you will have early adopters and you have people who are going to lean in. You will have those who are going to cling to the way they knew it until they no longer can. But I think at the end of the day, what's important is back to the point you're making about experimentation. You have to create a partnership with the IT organization, or if you have a chief digital or chief AI officer, whoever is owning the deployment and integration of AI into your work environment, to create a place where people can safely experiment. Many times I see some of the deployments very limited. So due to all the risks we're talking about, you cannot have a memory for your interaction, or you cannot save certain things, or you cannot upload your content. So the environment that was created for people to play with, it's limiting and it's not giving you the ability to fully take advantage of it. And there are technical ways now to overcome. There are solutions that are deployable to avoid some of those challenges, but it's going to take time. At the same time, people are using it. on their individual devices. And in a way, they create a lot more risks than you are trying to prevent. So I think from mindset perspective, it is really educating people on the guardrails and the good behavior and good collaboration with some of these tools, such that they know what to watch out for and how to navigate, and then have a place where you can escalate issues or troubleshoot where necessary, as opposed to trying to just prevent things from being adopted, because that train has gone. Everybody has at least one or two or three models on their devices. From a HR perspective, is starting more to embrace yourself and experiment and adopt it internally for HR processes, because that will give you the knowledge and the skills and empathy for helping the rest of the organization embrace it effectively.
That's also, I think, a really interesting topic because the HR folks don't tend to be on the cutting edge of adopting new technology.
Also,
Historically, HR functions have been a little bit under-resourced. I think investments go, probably rightfully so, into new product development, into attracting new customers. But there's some money left over maybe to find and develop the right talent. But how do you see the evolution of AI change the kind of skill sets, the kind of people that you'll need in the HR function to deliver on that?
it's an interesting question, because you almost need a bifurcated function. There is one that really needs to keep the legacy business and ways of working running, so you are not missing your payroll, paying attention to safety incidents, running the existing operations effectively without skipping the beat, comply with laws and manage the workforce. The second kind of stream is about innovation and bringing some of these technologies and running these experiments and having the ability to do the user studies and quantify the results and understand the effectiveness of some of these interventions, such that you can build a business case to then scale to the rest of the organization your solutions. So this is requiring more of a product mindset, analytical mindset, technical acumen, user-centered design in order to do some of this experimentation. Because at the end of the day, it's about the experience design for the workers. Now that you have new tools, capabilities, how does the role of manager change? You need to rethink the entire employment value proposition or experience in order to reimagine how the company will operate in the future, and then find the right model that you can slowly transition from the legacy to that new emerging model.
What does HR do to equip line managers with the skills to re-architect, redesign the work itself, to make optimal use of people or robots or AI or an augmented workforce? How do you see that need to upskill and equip managers with the tools to do that work change how HR, for example, thinks about leadership development?
Back to the earlier conversation around the context, is when the work environment is changing very rapidly, when you have different business models emerging, different preferences, when you have different threats happening, it's less about managing as it was required to manage during the industrial revolution. You have a production line, and then you have somebody supervising and making sure that the right amount of units with the right quality is being produced. Now you have the need to manage the complexity and simplify it for all the workers, to orchestrate that work effectively across different worker types, to bring that judgment and decision making on the spot to help navigate the complexity. And it's almost a different type of leadership. Not that before leaders didn't have to navigate that complexity, but it is almost at a faster pace. You have to really have that empathy, the ability to bring people along, to be able to tell the good stories and make rational decisions that may be also augmented by AI, just because you are able now to utilize it to understand the trends, to understand the patterns, to coach you to have the challenging conversations. So that ability to work and collaborate with AI is also important. Whether or not the pipeline will survive, it's an interesting conversation that is happening as we speak. We see a lot of news saying that entry level jobs are being automated, remote jobs are automated. And that tends to impact people earlier in their career. And I see this in my students too. There is a lot more challenge for them to find entry level jobs just because those entry level jobs now require a lot more years of experience and qualifications. And the educational institutions may not prepare them for the experience required for those entry jobs. And in a way, we're shooting ourselves in the foot because the leaders of the future are being built through these entry level jobs. How will those young professionals learn? Where will they learn the tacit knowledge of how things get done if they don't have the opportunity to observe somebody performing it that way? So we have this polarization now of skills where people who have depth and expertise and capabilities will be able to amplify their performance and work on interesting problems and have an earning and a living, whereas some of these entry level roles may not necessarily be able to have access to some of those jobs. And the companies are going to miss building their talent pipeline for the future succession. So a lot of interesting problems to be addressed.
I think that's a really interesting point that you're making, because I think there's a tragedy of the commons. For the individual company, the short-term benefit is that, hey, we can eliminate all these entry-level roles. AI can do this job. But the longer-term cost, not just to the organization, but also to society, is that we're losing out on developing those skills in people that we need further down the road. It requires quite a bit of foresight and quite a bit of an intentional strategy to get there. Do you see that? I mean, you're in daily conversations with HR leaders and business leaders. Is that something that really keeps people up, or is just the lure of the productivity gains that everybody's touting? Is that so irresistible that people push these concerns to the side?
At least the companies that I'm talking to, I think there is a lot more thoughtfulness put in place because initially you have this exuberant optimism that it can do a lot of things. And even if you run through experiments and you get to a point where indeed you prove quantitatively that the algorithm can do the same job at the same level of accuracy or quality, companies still choose to not displace people. One is back to the Duolingo story, where you get the pushback from your customers, and it's a reputational ding that you get for declaring that type of strategy. Another one is because the companies realize we're still in the very early stages of this technology deployment. We shouldn't rush to make some of these long-term decisions too soon unless we figure out the secondary and tertiary consequences of some of these decisions. We cannot assume that these technologies will exist and will operate in the way they do today. They'll continue to improve. They will continue to consolidate. Maybe it will change the way they process information. Maybe there will be infusion of different values into the algorithm that will not align to your company anymore. The importance of staying on top and monitoring it and not assuming that is ready to take over just because it's being developed as we speak. New capabilities are emerging is not part of the infrastructure yet. We don't have necessarily the electricity necessary to support it. So there are a lot of considerations from environmental impact of utilizing some of this. So I would say majority of the organizations that I'm working with are taking it with a grain of salt and pausing on dramatic changes just because it's too early to make significant decisions about your business and about your workforce when some of it may not pan out or it may not be proven yet to the degree you need in order to be a well-functioning business.
I think that's an excellent point, because I think there's also a lot of concerns about that these models are essentially black boxes. From the perspective of quality control, whose job is it really to make sure that the digital AI worker does a good job? And I just don't see most managers being ready for auditing that or even just having a way of thinking about that. It seems that these models also can deteriorate over time. So it's not enough to just check it once and then let it go loose.
And the other part is a lot of the systems out there, the legal infrastructure to be able to protect the companies or help them navigate is not there yet. There are a lot of things that are yet to be developed in order to be able to effectively use it and minimize the risks for the company.
Another interesting report I saw the other week was, I think S&P does like an annual survey on the state of AI and machine learning. What they found this year is that the percentage of companies that scrapped the majority of their AI investments, so decided not to go live with it, went up from 13% to, I think, 42%, which seems to me like that's a staggering number, right? It would basically mean that, right, close to half the companies throw away half the money that they invested and never even go past go. So I think that's another thing that probably keeps people on the conservative side of this equation.
And it's not only about the organizational investment. I think we need to learn from just basic analytics. People analytics has been around for decades, and we still talk about HR not being able to be data driven and gain that proverbial seat at the table through evidence based insights. It takes a long time to educate, to transform the way our organization works, to shift the mindset, shift the incentive structures. But also, I think we are now seeing a lot more interesting analysis. So you would have AI used for well-being purposes. We want to use the data to be able to understand when there is a risk of burnout or predict people's attrition. And on one side, the benefit is communicated and is obvious to the employees. On the flip side, people say, "Oh, you're monitoring me all the time." That creates a very different impact on your mental ability. We see how constant monitoring and efficiency pushes people to make different bad decisions for their own health and exposes them to accidents at work. So we need a little bit more data and more time to observe and collect the data and monitor not only what the business case originally said, but also what are the unintended consequences of some of these technologies on humans, on their well-being, on their mental health, on their physical health. Will that increase your attrition? Will that increase your spending on benefits coverage? There are a lot of things that you may think you solve one problem that in other places that may completely erode the original savings.
Speaking about like managing human capital, here's your book, Humanizing Human Capital, that you wrote with Solange Charas. And we talked about that in another episode of the podcast. But thinking about like the measurement side of this, right, it
Yes.
strikes me as that there's a significant problem that has to do with how we look at human capital, if you want to use the term human capital. And I think Peter Capelli talked about that, like we tend to look at people a little bit differently, for example, than other investments that we're making. People show up not on the balance sheet as an asset, they show up on the P&L as an expense. To what extent do you think this emergence of AI will force business leaders and HR leaders to rethink the measurements that they use, the metrics that they apply and utilize in making talent decisions?
Unfortunately, the prevalence of using some of those measurements is still low. You have a lot of the incentives that the companies cares about linked to financial results. So the leaders are going to pay attention to that data. They will look at what FP&A gives them, just because if they don't deliver, their bonuses are going to suffer or their job is on the line. And from a HR perspective, we still have ways to go to embed some of these human capital related measurements into the incentive structures for the leaders. So until that is happening, I think it'll be a challenging roads for Team Human in this battle against Team AI. And where there will be efficiency opportunities, the leaders are still going to decide to go with efficiency and deploying robots just because it's going to pay back in 2 years, and they're not complaining, they're not quitting, they're not suing your company. So we really need to have more conversations and start thinking about the policies that will be necessary to help humanity to transition to that future. Do you tax organizations for the agents they employ because those agents are displacing our workers? Do you ask companies to contribute to an educational fund that are provided to workforce development organizations in different states to help upskill the workforce who is not able to? Do you need to rethink the safety nets for gig economy, because a lot of people will be pushed into those occupations just because they'll have no other chance or choice, because there may be not enough jobs, traditional jobs? And how can those individuals make sure that they are able to earn a minimum or a decent income? How can you protect some of those platform workers that are perpetually forced to wait for whenever that next piece of activity comes their way so they can earn something, and the rest of the time they're not being paid for? Do you force some of these platforms to pay minimum wage for the workers on those platforms, such that at least there is earning potential that doesn't put them in a poverty situation? Do you create conversations around universal basic income so anyone can be protected, and redistribute some of this value to those who actually contributed their data to educate some of these algorithms? So I think there are a lot of big policy conversations that we need to engage with in order to help the society transition to that emerging future.
I want to go for a second back to the risk topic, because another story in the news a while back was that Workday is being sued for allegedly discriminating against older workers that apply. Somebody applied, I guess was over 40 or 50 years old, and immediately got a rejection notice. And it turns out wasn't the only person. So there's a lawsuit working itself through the court. So I'm wondering also, and I'd be curious in your take on this, to what extent there is risk coming at organizations really through the tools that we employ, all these software as a service model, whether it's Workday or whatever it might be. What do you see in that space? Is that something that keeps HR leaders up, or is that something that people are not that concerned about?
Absolutely. There's definitely a risk exposure due to discrimination, and whether that's an algorithmic discrimination or otherwise, right? The company will still be penalized for discrimination. What's interesting about Workday is it's a very new type of lawsuit. Previously, a lot of the technologies were out of the legal challenges just because they were the conduit, and it was still up to the humans that use those technologies to make the ultimate decision. So this will be the first one to see if technologies will be held accountable for some of this algorithmic management and decision making. The other aha moment for me was just hearing how the algorithm itself worked. There was a lot of keywords matching. So it's purely mechanical. The technology evolved. We can do better. Probably there are more sophisticated ways to do some of this analysis beyond just the keywords matching, and do adequate testing of your algorithms to make sure there's no disparate impact on different segments. And there are third-party tools emerging now to help you with that. So we can do better as a HR tech industry to really protect ourselves, but also do the right things by whoever is being impacted by our technology.
And there are obviously also some interesting scenarios, because as companies embrace these technologies to sift through the hundreds of thousands of resumes that they're getting, so do candidates apply the same technologies to match their job application exactly to the keywords. So it seems to become like a zero-sum game. Then we bring in another technology to check on that. And again, people find a work around that. The human mind tends to be wired towards finding a way around these obstacles. So I can also see that very quickly becomes like a never ending race, right? To
Race to the
catch up
bottom.
with those things.
And it's funny to hear the amount of creativity that humans put into tricking some of these algorithms. You have not only resumes that look exactly the same, with exactly the same style, exactly the same language of your cover letters, just because people just use AI to generate personalized content for hundreds of jobs at the same time. So, in a way that works against themselves because it creates a lot of noise and volume that then reduces the likelihood of you being selected or having the chance to even be selected. The other interesting stories is risks of somebody to do the interviews instead of you are there, and people use AI to put filters such that the face of the individual who takes the test or does the interview in your stead looks like you. And of course, there's still ways probably for some of these technologies to evolve so it makes it very seamless. So there are still ways to detect a lot of it, but the creativity of humans is just boundless when it comes to breaking rules and figuring out how to game the system. So talk about new emerging jobs, right? How do you detect some of this? How do you validate the authenticity of somebody and make sure that they didn't use some of this synthetic voice generation or synthetic face generation or avatars? A lot of companies are now moving to have interviews in person just because they're forced to make sure that the individual they're hiring actually exists.
Yeah, because I think a couple of them also hired some North Korean spies that then ended up
Yes,
working in the IT function, right?
exactly.
And it ended up paying them. How nice is that?
Exactly.
I guess we're early on in this, right? We'll see how this plays out, but there's certainly is a lot to be both excited about, but also deeply worried about.
Yeah.
We'll see how that shakes out. So, if you were to take out your crystal ball and you look at the best HR teams in 5 years, so 2030, will be the ones that do what? How do you see this changing what the best HR teams do 5 years from now?
If we look at the trajectory that we may be going to space by 2030, maybe the best HR teams are the ones that will create processes in the workforce of the future that can become multiplanetary. But joke aside, very little has changed from the mindset perspective. You still need to understand the business and understand how the company makes money. You still need to pay attention to the trends that are influencing your industry, that are influencing the technologies that are being deployed and developed. You need to stay connected to the ethical rootings and being that advocate for the workers, because at the end of the day, we are workers ourselves, and we don't own the worker experience, but we're the custodians, right? We can design those incentive systems. We can put policies in place that prevent bullying and discrimination and bias. But this requires us to have that language and the skills and understanding of how this technology works. What are the limitations? What are the emerging risks? Being fluent in finance, in business operations, is going to continue to be a critical part of what HR's ability to be a successful business partner will continue to be. I don't think much of that has changed. It's just the environment changed, the tools changed, the types of problems we have to solve changed, but the principles of what it means to be a good HR practitioner is still the same.
Good. So there's at least for the foreseeable future some degree of job security for people who bring those traditional HR skills to bear. Although probably at the same time, some of the more transactional aspects of the work, enrolling people in benefits and so forth, will probably get automated or augmented with AI.
But you still need design people. You still need to think through how you communicate, through convincing people to enroll, which
Yeah.
partners you select. So I think we overestimate the ability of the humanity to make significant changes really fast. I think 5 years from now, we'll still have employment, hopefully. We'll still have HR, despite the fact that many people call to automate HR, eliminate HR. I think we're still going to be here.
I think so too. I think we heard that before in the 1980s and around the year 2000. There were similar concerns, whether it was digital technology or the internet. Software is going to eat the world. But I think the other thing that I find interesting about what you're saying is that there seems to be an increased emphasis on design. So instead of just taking what we have, I think this is a time that really calls for HR people to step up and not just apply this to their own context, but also start to think about how they deliver value to the organization, how they equip the leaders in the organization to make those decisions effectively. And I think that's a really interesting transition, because my sense is that's a space that a lot of HR departments have abandoned over the years. So what we used to call organizational development, only I think a small number of organizations still has really capable teams there. Do you think that this becomes like a little bit like a renaissance to rebuild those capabilities?
I think it's about expanding those capabilities because it's really understanding what is considered domain knowledge. That regardless of how much automation there is in place, you still need to possess inside the company and need to nurture and develop and manage it effectively. There is also something about the taste. And it's not to say that technology cannot give you a lot of data and information for you to make decisions, or humans cannot see patterns very fast, right? There is a symbiosis that can come out of the collaboration, but the ability to choose the right type of experiment or to choose the right type of product or the messaging is still very much human trait. So having that taste and having the ability to infuse that into the organizational practices is going to continue to be a very important human activity. The the ability to bring those human values inside of the technology adoption is going to be even more important too. As more of these AI models are being deployed inside the company and the company data and content and information is being uploaded to train the model with company specific content, we need to have somebody who ensures that whatever the outcomes that the model generates are aligned to what the company stands for, to the values that we want to represent as an organization. Having somebody who curates those values and defines and ensures that there is a way to check what the algorithms create and course correct along the way is also going to be important. So it's a broader set of capabilities in addition to just traditional work design that will be necessary to be part of this vocabulary of HR practitioners. Yes, it has a technical component to it. It requires literacy of how the machines work and how the algorithm processes a lot of these details, but being part of the design and creating the opportunity for IT to influence it in a positive way will be an important part of that.
It also makes me think of competency models. They've been around for a long time, right? Organizations have them, they have leadership companies, they have functional competencies.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this, and I've built a few in my time, and I just realized that all of those probably need to be reworked with an eye on the technology. AI will
Yes.
change a lot of those
And
things.
yes, and think about HRIS systems. You have employee records for your workforce, but you also need employee records for your digital workforce, and then decision making on when you design one, when you create it, how do you make sure it performs well? How will you know whether it's starting to go off the rail? When is it time to pull the plug on it and sunset it? There are a lot of new decisions, operational processes to be put in place in order to manage this agentic world as well. So will HR own that? I think Johnson Huang said that it's going to be IT who will be the HR for agents, but I think HR also has a role to play in that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I would be very hesitant to delegate that to the IT function. I don't think they're adequately prepared for the task. Listen, this is a super interesting conversation, and we could go on for hours and hours. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. If people want to learn more about you and your work and how you can maybe help them, where should they go?
The easiest is to find me on LinkedIn, Stella with one L, Lupushor. You can also find me on the book website, humanizinghumancapital.com, where Solange and I post on a monthly basis our blog and perspective on where we see the world of measurements in human capital going. You can find me also on my website, reframe.work, WORK, and you can email me at Stella was one L at reframe.org.
Wonderful. And we put all those links into the show notes so that people don't need to rewind and capture all of this. And I really highly encourage people to reach out to you because you really offer a wealth of knowledge relative to this intersection of technology and human capital. So I hope that people take advantage of your expertise. So thank you so much for coming again on the show. It was a real treat to have you. And I guess given the way the technology goes, we probably have to have another conversation 6 months from now to see what has changed. But at least for the time being, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Looking forward to it.
We hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, be sure to subscribe, like, share, or comment. Until next time, let's make work matter.